with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, March 31st, 2021. My name is Emma Vigeland in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Andreas Malm on her book, How to Blow Up a Pipeline, Learning to Fight in a World on Fire. Meanwhile, President Biden is unveiling his over $2 trillion infrastructure package today, which includes repairing thousands of miles of roads, major bridges, and more, eliminating lead pipes for our water, billions for electric and broadband infrastructure, community-based health and elder care, affordable housing, and more. This is reported to be the first half of what Biden hopes to be a $4 trillion project. The White House plans to announce that they'll fund this with a corporate tax hike from 28% to 21%, after Republicans slashed it to that from 35% in 2017. And newsflash, this is a very popular way to go for Democrats. Meanwhile, Representative Matt Gaetz is facing a federal investigation into an alleged sexual relationship with a 17-year-old girl that may have violated sex trafficking laws. More on that later. In vaccine news, Pfizer has announced that its shots are wildly effective for children ages 12 to 15 with 0 infections reported in trials and no serious symptoms shown. 29% of U.S. adults have received at least one vaccine dose. Yesterday, Brazil set a new record in COVID-19 deaths with over 3,700 in one day, a few weeks after embattled President Jair Bolsonaro told Brazilians to stop whining about COVID deaths. He has seen mass resignations from his cabinet as well. In leaked calls obtained by Jane Mayer of The New Yorker, the Koch brothers' empire admits that the Democrats' pro-democracy bill, the For the People Act, is just too popular to fight in the public sphere. Instead, they are scheming up an all-out behind-the-scenes offensive in communications with McConnell to stop HR/S1. And lastly, the New York Times reported that NYU's major hospital set aside vaccines for corporate Bloomberg employees, coincidentally, after Bloomberg donated $25 million to the university on March 2nd.
As an NYU graduate, that sounds about right.
So sorry. All this and more on today's program. Thank you so much for joining us, ladies and gents, and everybody in between. We will begin this show talking about Matt Gaetz. Obviously a major story. He seems to have engaged in a sexual relationship allegedly with a 17-year-old girl. So, curious sequence of news yesterday. In the morning, Axios got a scoop on Matt Gaetz potentially voluntarily leaving Congress in order to pursue a gig on Newsmax on his own accord, of course, right? But then 10 to 12 hours later, the New York Times broke a story that Matt Gaetz is under investigation by the DOJ over possible sex trafficking charges. It alleges that Gaetz, who's 38 years old, had a sexual relationship with a 17-year-old girl and traveled across state lines with her, potentially compensated her, violating federal sex trafficking laws, allegedly. And this investigation opened up when one of his buddies in Florida, an official named Joel Greenberg, was indicted on very similar charges, including sex trafficking with a minor. And by the way, as Gaetz is trying to claim that this is an extortion attempt for millions of dollars by some FBI official. It's all very convoluted, but he's also going to try to say, oh, the New York Times, the liberal media, they're all against me. This investigation opened up under the Trump administration, under William Barr. So there's been no one more loyal to Trump than Gates. Even Barr had to pursue these charges, it seems. So Matt Gaetz went on Tucker Carlson's program in a bizarre interview that's gone viral to defend himself in a curious way by throwing Tucker under the bus. Here's the first of those clips.
And I believe we are in an era of our politics now, Tucker, where people are smeared to try to take them out of the conversation. I'm not the only person on screen right now who's been falsely accused of a terrible sex act. You were accused of something that you did not do, and so you know what this feels like. You know the pain it can bring to your family, and you know how it just puts people on defense when you're accused of something so salacious and awful. But it did not happen. It is not true.
So he decided to talk about how Tucker Carlson had potentially faced an accusation way in the past. I really haven't heard much about this. It doesn't seem like it was credible. As much as we loathe Tucker Carlson, we have to be fair here. But he went on a friendly program in order to ostensibly get people on his side, and then decided to do a whataboutism and shiv the host in the side multiple times and just alienate a potential ally. And when that didn't work, Tucker later clarified, okay, this accusation was 20 years ago. I don't know this woman. And again, from what I've heard, it doesn't seem like this was a credible accusation. When that didn't work, Gaetz tried to rope Tucker in a second way.
Again, I only know what I've read in the New York Times. I can say that actually you and I went to dinner about 2 years ago. Your wife was there, and I brought a friend of mine. You'll remember her. And she was actually threatened by the FBI, told that if she wouldn't cop to the fact that somehow I was involved in some pay-for-play scheme, that she could face trouble. And so I do believe that there are people at the Department of Justice who are trying to smear me, providing for flights and hotel rooms for people that you're dating who are of legal age is not a crime. And I'm just troubled that the lack of any sort of legitimate investigation into me would then convert into this extortion attempt.
Permute?
I don't remember the woman you're speaking of or the context at all, honestly. But
who knows if this dinner even happened? Gaetz then went to describe this alleged extortion plot. I mean, I say alleged, it's a 95% chance it's made up. I mean, I might even go higher than that. Do not bet on Matt Gaetz being truthful here. Tucker then closed this interview after Matt Gaetz left with just bewilderment, and not the feigned kind that he often puts on, but seemingly authentic.
if you just saw our Matt Gaetz interview, that was one of the weirdest interviews I've ever conducted. That story just appeared in the news a couple of hours ago. And on the certainty that there's always more than you read in the newspaper, we immediately called Matt Gaetz and asked him to come on and tell us more, which, as you saw, he did. I don't think that clarified much, but it certainly showed this is a deeply interesting story, and we'll be following it. Don't quite understand it, but we'll bring you more when we find out.
Okay, but I do love the admission. Hey, you know, we're not really journalists. We brought on the congressman to tell his side of the story because we inherently don't like the New York Times, and this guy's a Republican, so we want to give him a platform to spout whatever he wants about the accusations leveled against him. But one, he went after me for no reason in order to try to say, hey, we're the same, bro. We're the same. And Tucker's like, I don't think we are. And two, he also just didn't make any sense. There's so much more to that interview. I would encourage everybody to look into it. And I don't want to take away from the fact that there is seemingly an underage girl or someone who was an underage who is involved here. Yeah, it's Pizza Gates. It's why isn't Marjorie Taylor Greene up in arms about this potential situation as she is steeped in QAnon obsession, but
I mean, it's Dennis Hastert. I mean, maybe not quite to the degree of Hastert. I mean, who knows? I mean, we have to wait on the details on this, but this is a thing that powerful people like to do.
Exactly. I mean, this is Epstein-esque, and all we heard from conservative circles was, oh, Jeffrey Epstein connected to Bill Clinton. Let's not talk about the connections to Donald Trump, but those were all, I guess, ubiquitous, completely valid critiques of powerful people. But there's no discussion, and there's no secret cabal when it involves Matt Gaetz, and when there's an open investigation that was started. You know what? Maybe Matt Gaetz is a plant by the Democrats.
Well, I was going to say
the whole time rooting out the pedophiles, right? Because Bill Barr opened up this investigation. There we go, Matt.
There's literal talk that Gaetz is, a plant by the Republicans, and he's actually working with Trump, and this is just, his cover, the cover being blown, or maybe it's not blown. Maybe this is actually part of his plan too, and they're really going to catch a lot of them now.
Right, so when he goes to jail, then he can finally get to the heart of the center of the Pizzagate cabal. Kebab.
Exactly. Yeah, this is him going deep cover.
There's a Pizzagate kebab too, and maybe I'm hungry, but I digress. That is a very peculiar situation, and I just want to emphasize this again. Of course, there was an underage girl who was allegedly taken advantage of here. As much as there are many layers of humor to this story, there is also a potential victim, and that should not be lost in this. But again, what the hell is going on in Florida? Speaking, what is going on in Florida?
Always the people you least expect.
Right.
Or maybe not.
Hope Nestor isn't too brokenhearted over this. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Andreas Malm will be here to discuss his book.
Hey, are you hiring for spring? Who are you going to hire? What type of role are you hiring for? Maybe you need to hire someone to wear many hats, like I do on this show. That could be a challenge. Or maybe you have a simple position to fill, but it's taken forever to find somebody who's a great fit for your company. Look, that's where ZipRecruiter comes in. That's where it came in for me. ZipRecruiter can help you find qualified candidates fast, and now you can try it for free at ZipRecruiter.com/majority. Doesn't matter if you need to hire a civil engineer in New York, or if you need to hire a pediatric nurse in, I don't know, Omaha, an attorney in Colorado, a mascot in Missouri. ZipRecruiter's matching technology finds people with the right experience for your job and actively invites them to apply. It's so effective that 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. From accountant to zoologist or producer of the Majority Report named Brendan, and everything in between, ZipRecruiter makes hiring easier. That's the way we found Brendan. Couldn't be happier. Right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free at our Only Our Listeners Get It link. You ready? It's ZipRecruiter.com/majority. If you go to ZipRecruiter.com/majority today, you try out ZipRecruiter for free. We get credit for sending you, of course. Every time you do that, Brenda gets a wing. Once again, that's ZipRecruiter.com/majority. MAJORITY. ZipRecruiter.com/majority. Joining me now from Sweden is Andreas Malm. He teaches human ecology at Lund University in Sweden. He is the author with Ashura Esmailian of Iran on the Brink, Rising Workers and Threats of War, and of Fossil Capital, which won the Isaac and Tamara Deutscher Memorial Prize, and his latest, How to Blow Up a Pipeline, Learning to Fight in a World on Fire. Andreas, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Sam.
Let's start with, I guess, and I want to dovetail into, we were just talking before we started here about our relative situations in terms of the pandemic. There's sort of a paradox with what's happening between climate change and the COVID pandemic. There's also implications for the movement to fight climate change. Just speak to that a little bit, and then we can talk about sort of your assessment of climate activism more broadly speaking.
Yeah, it feels like an aeon ago, but in 2019, the climate movement was at its peak in terms of popular support and mobilization on the streets in the global north, at least. And then it just fell off a cliff when the pandemic broke out and suspended all activities. So Greta Thunberg, the key figure in this movement, announced that henceforth it will all be about the coronavirus, and we're not going to have those strikes and Friday marches any longer. We'll just go online. And climate was on the top of the political agenda, at least in Europe, for 2019. And then everything was just taken over by the coronavirus, and climate disappeared from the agenda. And that's, of course, extremely unfortunate. But we will inevitably face more climate disasters in the near future. And we have to hope that the movement regains its momentum and perhaps escalates and swells and radicalizes. That's at least my hope.
Yes. And we should say, excuse me, the interesting sort of paradox is that during this past year, the amount of carbon that we're putting into the air has gone down, obviously, because economic activity and travel has gone down so dramatically. What do you think? And then we'll get to sort of a broader assessment of the climate fighting movement. What do you think the implications are of that?
Well, there are many implications. So emissions fell globally about 7% last year, and that was obviously not because of any deliberate mitigation of climate change, but it was an entirely unintentional side effect of measures put in place to combat the pandemic. Now that shows that emissions reductions are in fact possible, even if they happened for other reasons. And a cut by 7% per year is at the very high end of what people in the climate movement have demanded. So mostly we haven't called for that kind of abrupt cut in aviation and other forms of transportation that the combating of this pandemic implied. So I think that people will remember that it is in fact possible to close things down, and you can, as a state, go in and tell businesses that you will have to close now. We need to shut those shopping malls down and things like that. The difference, of course, will be that a transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy is forever. Whereas the measures put in place to combat the pandemic were announced from the beginning as temporary ones that would soon revert back to business as usual. But still, what they did show, and what I think people will remember, is that states can, in fact, interfere with the operations of markets, and it's not technically impossible to close certain very destructive and harmful industries down. And I think that this will change the climate debate, I hope at least, after the pandemic, if there is a time after the pandemic, and people will recall that things are in fact possible.
I mean, there has been, at least I think in this country, to a certain extent, I mean, part of it is a function of coming off of Trump, but there is I think that comes out of the pandemic, or could potentially come out of the pandemic, is a sense, and this is, and for, I guess we're now 40 some odd years into a period where the government is perceived to be the obstacle to things. There is a sense that as a collective, and that, articulated through our government, we can actually do things, that and have and change the course in some respects of nature, if you will, in the sense of the pandemic. And I think that's it's sort of a fascinating element that could come out of the pandemic. I mean, one of the things that, certainly early on, I heard this more too, is that what we were experiencing with the pandemic was similar to the dynamic of climate change, but sped up multiple times. And it really is. I mean, these are two things that, you can say are impacting the world, right? And there's very few events that this actually takes place where everyone is in some fashion, theoretically, impacted by this. Let's speak to the challenge that's brought about, and maybe reflect it back upon how climate activism has operated, to the idea of the pandemic happens like this, and it is sped up. And because it's sped up, the implications we feel far more dramatically, broadly speaking, than we would with climate change. I mean, climate change is sort of hard to sort of really hold in your hand and look at because it's happening so broadly, and except for to look at the science documented, it's happening. It doesn't feel like it's happening in that moment, right? In the way that COVID does. I walk out, I've got to wear a mask. I could catch it tomorrow and I'd be sick in a couple of days. Speak to that dilemma and how it's been addressed by climate activism up to this point.
Yeah, let me just say that I think there is a degree of an optic illusion, or maybe even an ideological distortion or misrecognition of what's going on in this way of framing the problem. Just the other day, I'm sure you read the news. There was a glacier that fell into a dam in northern India and set off an enormous avalanche of water and stones and sand and mud that just suddenly smashed through a village and killed 200 people. That is global warming hitting extremely fast and brutal and hard. And you see precisely the same sequence when a hurricane smashes into Louisiana, or there's a wildfire in Oregon or somewhere else in the Pacific West. These instances of climate impact are just as sudden and immediate as a pandemic. And a pandemic, in fact, a pandemic such as this one, COVID-19, is part of a trend where we have more and more infectious diseases jumping from wildlife into humanity. So I think the two trends, global warming and what you might call global sickening, they develop in tandem and in fairly similar fashion. And then you have those moments of immediate crisis where what states do is that they combat the symptoms. They don't go after the drivers. And still, no states that I know of during this year have even made any attempt to address the drivers of pandemics, namely rampant deforestation, primarily in the tropics, and wildlife trading, and other completely unsustainable encroachments on wildlife that create those diseases. And it's exactly the same thing with global heating. What states seem capable of doing is to evacuate certain citizens in harm's way when a hurricane is approaching, or sending firefighters into areas afflicted by wildfires. But what states do not seem capable of doing is to go after the drivers of global heating. And these are the sources of fossil fuel production and combustion, and close them down. That is the task of climate activists and the climate movement, to go into primarily fossil fuel production and try to shut things down, because that's what has to happen. Otherwise, we'll be doomed to ever escalating, ever increasing, ever deteriorating disasters like this.
And so let's talk about what climate activism has done to this point in terms of that agenda of closing down production. Where, how do you see its successes and how do you see its failures in terms of doing that?
Well, to focus again on the global north, as you know, there have been struggles around pipelines in the US and in Canada, led primarily by indigenous peoples that have fought against the construction of those pipelines. There was an episode fairly recently in Canada where you had people closing down much of the transportation network and other parts of logistical infrastructure in Canada to oppose pipeline construction. In Europe, where I'm active, it looks a little bit different. We don't have the same situation with indigenous populations fighting fossil fuel infrastructure, but what we do have primarily in Germany, which is the powerhouse of the European economy and responsible for most of the emissions, is a movement that has systematically targeted the lignite coal mines. That's the dirtiest fossil fuel of all. And what we've done is we've assembled something like 7,000 people and entered those mines and shut them down for 1 day or 2 days or something like that, to put pressure on the German state to actually close these mines down. Now, we've reached some distance with this, but certainly not far enough, because the current decision is that those mines will be closed by 2038. So that's another 2 decades of digging up the dirtiest fossil fuel. That's completely unacceptable. They should be closed now and replaced with renewable energy. So that's why this struggle will continue in Germany. And I think we've learned a lot about how to do this, how you can break through police cordons and enter this kind of mines and surrounding facilities and close the infrastructure down. And I think the climate camps doing mass actions like this should spread and proliferate everywhere in the global north where you have those kind of facilities, and shut them down more extensively, more frequently, for a longer time.
But that's from a tactical perspective. Like, strategically speaking, like what is the agenda for climate change activists? And that, I mean, from a strategic standpoint, if the tactic is to shut down a mine here or there, is it to create pressure on governments, or is it to undercut the essentially the ease in which profit is derived from these activities?
Very good question, and I think it's both. I think it's a way. It should be a way of deterring investors from pouring more money into fossil fuel production. And here's where you have the possibility of property destruction, of trying to make clear to those investors that if you keep on investing in fossil fuels, you can't be sure that someone won't come and actually wreck your machinery and your equipment and destroy it, put it out of business. But at the end of the day, it will have to be governments that take the decisions to shut down fossil fuel production. I mean, no one else can do it. Activists can't make that kind of decision. What we can do is we can put pressure on the states. Just like the Black Lives Matter movement in the US put pressure on certain parts of the US state apparatus on state level, perhaps primarily, to reform policing and concede various concessions to the movement. It would be the same thing with moves away from fossil fuels. That won't happen by states, by incumbent governments taking those initiatives of their own accord spontaneously. If it will ever happen, it will be in response to mass pressure from below, from outside the state apparatuses. That's what the past few decades of continued business as usual have taught us, I think.
I want to examine those two elements, and then I want to in a moment compare it to Black Lives Matter movement, which, like you say, we just saw, for instance, in Austin, Texas, they've had a significant cut, a fraction of their police budget, but a significant fraction that they have now using to buy hotels and house the unhoused in Austin, Texas, just as an example. We see other examples locally around the country as at least initial steps. I mean, some indication that these massive protests that took place over the summer had an impact. I want to just disaggregate these two things, because your book, obviously, How to Blow Up a Pipeline, it's not specifically a how-to on how to blow up a pipeline, but the idea is that from a tactical standpoint, you're making an argument that some of these tactics may need to be expanded in terms of where the movement has been. This is a relatively controversial, I guess, perspective, but we'll examine it a little bit more. But so the strategy is ultimately to get the government to shut these down. Is the idea of diminishing the profit of the fossil fuel industry, or to put at risk, to discourage investment in this? Because it seems to me there's a couple of different ways that investment is discouraged. One is that we have amassed enough of a movement that public policy is going to change in 5 or 10 years. So your horizon to get your investment returns is very severely limited. And we're going to throw other obstacles into doing that. You expend a lot of money in a drilling rig. Well, if we shut that down 100 days out of the year, the returns on that investment are going to be diminished dramatically. What's the idea? Is it just these two things go in tandem? We want to diminish investment in these things and simultaneously push governments, or is it that diminished investment in these things makes it easier to push governments?
And this is a very good way of posing the question. I think you're onto something very important, and I think that part of the bridge between the two perspectives, if you like, is that while potentially, I mean, we're talking about potential campaigns that haven't materialized yet, but if these sort of campaigns were to kick off for real, you would have a reduction of profits, and you would also put a stigma, a real social stigma on these kind of investment activities. Just like I mean, to again use the analogy of BLM, that you established certain kind of how should I put it, moral. I mean, the BLM surge that happened after George Floyd put a certain moral tarnish on policing in the U.S. or an ethical critique of the police structures in the U.S. And I think it could potentially work in a similar fashion, that with massive campaigns against the most insane fossil fuel infrastructure expansion that's happening, you will shift the balance, tip the scales against that sort of expansion, and demonstrate that this is actually not acceptable. It can't go on like this. Just to take one example, Total, the largest private corporation in France, an oil and gas company, is planning to go into the Arctic to drill for even more gas with the support of Macron, the French president. And everyone should at least know that this is just absolutely bizarre, that in 2021, with so much of the planet on fire and ice melting at a speed that tracks the worst case scenarios, you have a major oil and gas corporation wanting to go into the Arctic to get more of the stuff out of the ground, to burn even more. There should be a massive campaign against that in France. There isn't, but there should be. And it should include going after the installations, the facilities, the headquarters of Total, and make that into a burning political issue in that country. That would make it politically impossible in the end for the president to support this totally unacceptable project of expansion. So I just imagine that these two things could go hand in hand, trying to reduce profits and also putting pressure on the states to make the necessary decisions.
I want to explore this idea that that what you're talking about when we talk about diminishing the profits for fossil fuels is not a battle between, I think, as you write, it's not a question of efficiency versus idealism. This may come a little bit from Fossil Capital, your earlier work, but this idea that we have fossil fuel because it is such an efficient form of energy, both in terms of cost and whatnot, It's in fact not that it's necessarily more efficient particularly at this juncture, but that it's simply the thing that you can get the biggest markup on, that you can get the biggest profit from, as opposed to renewable energies. It's not that renewable energies are not efficient. I mean, like this dynamic, I think people who know venture capital, they come across medicines or inventions that would be incredibly helpful to people, but there's just not a 10x or 100x return on these. And so they don't invest in them. That's the dynamic that we're talking about with these different types of energies. Is that right?
Exactly. And it's so paradoxical because now renewable energy is so cheap that it beats fossil fuels in most places in the world. And this holds even after the collapse in oil prices during the pandemic. So solar power in many parts of the globe produces the cheapest electricity that human beings have ever produced. And still you don't see the shift. And the paradox here is that the extreme cheapness, and the more extreme it becomes, the cheapness of renewable energy is a curse from an investment standpoint, precisely for the reason that you say that you can't get the same profit, you don't get the same yield, the same gain from producing something as cheap as renewable energy is now becoming. So for the energy giants in the world, companies like Total or BP or ExxonMobil or Chevron, it's still massively more profitable to invest in fossil fuels than in renewable energy. So the transition, and it's extremely important to remember that investments in energy are not determined by price, but by profit. What's most profitable is what will attract investment money. So the transition away from fossil fuels to renewable energy will not happen by private corporations, or for that matter, state-owned profit-hunting corporations, shifting from unprofitable fossil fuels to profitable, cheap renewable energy. The transition will happen by states ordering them to do so by some regulation or other, or even taking them over, nationalizing those corporations and executing the transition because it's what's needed for human beings and for the planet, not because it will create more profit. It might create cheaper electricity, but it won't create more profit because the sun and the wind, they come naturally, spontaneously. You don't need to invest in a lot of labor and fixed capital to get it out of the ground as you do with oil and gas and coal, and then you can sell it as a commodity. The flow of sunlight and wind come naturally for free. That's why they're so fundamentally cheap and unprofitable. It's very paradoxical.
You get one bite at the apple. You build the panels, and then basically you don't have any way of getting any more profit. I mean, they sort of figured out the opposite with with printers, right? Like we can build a sort of a junky printer. We're not going to make our money there, but if we can sell the ink each time, then we're going to make our money through the ink. So this question of, so if the issue is to cut down on profit, one of the things that you suggest is that activists, because of the dire need that's going on here, increase essentially the arrows in their quiver. And you're not suggesting that everyone should take this tack, and you're not talking about violence towards people or anything like that. It is the idea of how do you make the investment class, the wealthiest people in the world, essentially, nervous about their returns by investing in the apparatus that are going to do this. And one of those ways is you show that maybe public opinion's turning against them and governments could have new policies. And the other is to literally take some of this stuff offline. What do you say to people who say look, that type of direct action that you're talking about has never worked. And we have Gandhi, we have MLK, we have the suffragettes, we have, anti-apartheid movement. That we've shown time and time again that when you are civilly disobedient, that's far more effective than any type of direct action that you're talking about.
Yeah, so here we could talk for hours or even days, but I spent some time in my book on debunking this narrative of history as fundamentally sanitized dishonest in its treatment of those actual events. So the struggle for independence in India contained a lot of violence and property destruction. So did the suffragette movement for women's right to vote. So did, of course, the civil rights movement in its various manifestations. And not to mention the anti-apartheid struggle, of course, in South Africa, which had its own, the ANC ran an armed campaign. And in every instance that strategic pacifists adduce in support of their thesis that the most successful struggles have been completely nonviolent. In fact, if you just scratch the surface, you will find a lot of property destruction and confrontation with the police and other aspects of the ruling order and things like that. So, as historical science, that thesis is extremely weak and extremely poor. It's just not correct.
Well, and what you're talking about, let's talk about what you call the radical flank effect. What does that mean, and how does that operate?
Yeah, so that term comes from sociological research into the civil rights movement in the US, and the argument the researchers have made is that MLK became palatable, or at least viewed as the least bad alternative in the eyes of the American state when there was a radical flank to the left of MLK, so to speak, that was made up by rioters from Birmingham and onwards in the ghettos around the country, and by Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam, and then the Black Panthers and those parts of the Black movement that said we're going to fight by any means necessary. And because that was a real threat, the state realized that unless we make concessions, serious concessions to the mainstream of the civil rights movement, we're going to end up with these guys who in our eyes are much more terrible. So because of the existence of a radical flank, the civil rights mainstream achieved its demands. That's the argument.
We can
now, of course, things are more complicated than that, but you can also find a radical flank effect of a similar kind in hundreds of instances in modern history, where, in Europe, the demands for the 8-hour working day or democratic elections with the right to vote for everyone, these demands were achieved under the threat of the Bolshevik Revolution and its spread into Europe. So as an historical phenomenon, I think the radical flank effect clearly exists. And I would say that it existed in the Black Lives Matter movement last year as well.
So with just about a minute left here, from the perspective of, we have people who are more comfortable, not as urgent about these dynamics, call them the white middle class in the context of this country. What is the recommendation from your perspective in terms of how they should perceive that radical flank? How should that relationship be managed?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, when you frame it this way, the task of the radical flank is to shake things up and to make clear that unless we change the way we do things, there is a risk that the whole order will be overturned. So it's partly about scaring the ruling class into mending its ways and making serious concessions, because otherwise you will end up with a lot of trouble. That's how the radical flank worked in the US in the 60s and 70s, and that's, I think, what the climate movement needs now. We need a radical flank to the left of Greta Thunberg and Extinction Rebellion and what has existed so far, that says that, look, things are now so grave, so serious, that we can't accept this business as usual anymore. We're going to start putting it apart physically. And the way to avoid this scenario is to concede to all the demands made by the more mainstream current of the movement. and then we can start talking business, doing business. I mean, that's when things really start to happen.
Andreas Malm, the book is How to Blow Up a Pipeline, Learning to Fight in a World on Fire. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you.
All right.
All right. Excellent interview by Sam with Andreas Malm and Malm. I'm sorry.
Malm, yeah, I have additive, on that discussion, particularly on the ANC, and there is definitely a impression that was nonviolent. Malm pointed out the MK, which was the armed wing of the anti-apartheid struggle. This is from The Long Walk to Freedom, Nelson Mandela, and it's a shame Michael's not here because every time you talk to Nelson Mandela, you want to do the voice. But anyway, in planning the direction and form that the MK would take, we considered 4 types of violent activities: sabotage, guerrilla warfare, terrorism, and open revolution. For a small and fledgling army, open revolution was inconceivable. Terrorism inevitably reflected poorly on those who used it, undermining any public support it might otherwise garner. Guerrilla warfare was a possibility, but since the ANC had been reluctant to embrace violence at all, it made sense to start with the form of violence that inflicted the least harm against individuals: sabotage. Because it did not involve loss of life, it offered the best hope for reconciliation among the races afterward. We did not want to start a blood feud between white and black. Animosity between Afrikaner and Englishman was still sharp 50 years after the Anglo-Boer War. What would race relations be like between white and black if we provoked a civil war? Sabotage had the virtue of requiring the least manpower. Our strategy was to make selective forays against military installations, power plants, telephone lines, and transportation links, targets that would not only hamper the military effectiveness of the state, but frighten National Party supporters, scare away foreign capital, and weaken the economy. So yeah, this is all, your faves did this too, folks, I guess is the point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I stepped away when, I don't know, Sam suggested that, so I don't feel like I can comment on it, but
I mean, I think Sam, I don't know to the degree Sam believed that himself or was conveying a, commonly held belief about essay, but Mom accurately corrected that. That is a very, it's a pernicious whitewashing of history that we see with all sort of radicals or even, semi-radicals.
Right. And it's also just it's treating movements as a monolith throughout history, and specifically, I guess whitewashing other elements of strategy and just like the messiness of what mass civil movements actually.
And yeah, what it takes to get change. I mean, it would be nice if it took sit-ins and going to the ballot box. That the left flank thing is entirely right, though. People in power need to be afraid. And if they aren't, if it's like we saw yesterday with Elizabeth Warren and Chuck Schumer grinning into the camera saying, "Hey, right, Joe Biden," and get student, like that's not the way this actually is going to happen. That is marketing. And so, yeah.
Yeah, it also.
But also, I just add. Go on, Emma. You can. I'm going to look for something else in this book here.
No, I just to add to what you said, it's also an effort to maintain their own power in a sense, because when there's actual power seized through activism that isn't just call your senator. It threatens people like Chuck Schumer, Elizabeth Warren, Bob Menendez, who no matter who you are. It's a shakeup of the boat that they're on, even if they're one of the kinder people riding the boat, or better people riding the boat.
Yeah, I mean, I would recommend also this. Everyone should read The Long Walk to Freedom, Mandela's biography, because it really does demystify a lot of these things. But there's another instance, and I can't remember which election it was, but basically talking about, like, even though as Black people in Africa, we're not allowed to vote in these elections, there's still like an outcome that would be more beneficial than another, which is kind of interesting when, people talk about regarding electoral politics as either completely irrelevant or maybe slightly relevant. So both these things lived within Mandela, and people should, I think, just read his biography instead of arguing about, theory gleaned from Twitter.
Yes. All right. Let's get into something from the Derek Chauvin trial. You down, Matt? And then we'll head into the fun half.
Let's do it.
So, witnesses are being called at Derek Chauvin's trial, which began this week. Obviously, Derek Chauvin was the police officer who knelt on George Floyd's neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds, including after he stopped breathing for many minutes afterwards. And as the gurney was rolling up behind George Floyd's already dead body, he continued to kneel on his neck with George Floyd's face, now deceased, pushed into the pavement. I'm still trying to make sure that that image remains in people's minds just because of how relevant it is, obviously. Now, this witness spoke about what she experienced. She was one of the bystanders who was pleading with Derek Chauvin to stop what he was doing. Here she is. She was 17 at the time, recounting her experience witnessing this murder.
Would you tell the ladies and gentlemen how you're viewing, experiencing what happened to George Floyd has affected your life?
When I look at George Floyd, I look at my dad, I look at my brothers, I look at my cousins, my uncles, because they are all black. I have a black father, I have a black brother, I have black friends. And I look at that and I look at how that could have been one of them. It's been nights I stayed up apologizing and apologizing to George Floyd for not doing more and not physically interacting and not saving his life. But it's like, it's not what I should have done. It's what he should have done. He should have.
That's the answer. Thank you.
Her name is Darnella Frazier. She was 17 at the time. And listen to how she puts it upon herself to bear this burden. I mean, she's 18 years old now. She sees someone who reminds her of her family for obvious reasons and the people that she loves. And she puts that burden upon herself and feels guilt for someone else murdering a man. And that is just the weight of society and the expectations that we put on Black people to rise above all of the systemic, vile oppression and just systemic racism that has just permeated our society and most viscerally our law enforcement for decades and decades and centuries. And the fact that she has to have any of those feelings as a teenager is just so heart-wrenching and so unfair. I mean, it just encapsulates how unfair and how unjust the Black experience in this country is. I thought that was just heart-wrenching, as I said. And also the violence that she had to witness at that young age. It's not fair. She was a kid. She still is a kid. And that stays with you, especially as a Black person in this country, in ways I will never fully understand, and in ways that have just ripple effects. It's societal trauma. It's an understanding and a bold-faced incident, a traumatizing incident right in front of your face that shows how little the United States government, as exerted through police, cares about your life. Matt, did you want to say something? I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I think that was well said.
All right. Well, it's 12:55, but I think we're going to head into the fun half. 6-4, I don't know the number by heart. 646 Something. You'll see it on the screen.
God, now I don't know it. I would have 646-257-30
3920.
920. There you go. Thanks, Kyle.
Say what's happening on Left Reckoning.
Left Reckoning tomorrow night. Brian Box Brown coming to talk about pot legalization around the country and what to look for in how they're going to try to screw it up and make it more corporate for monopolies, because that's who the government serves and what they want. So check that out tomorrow night. Left Reckoning, 8 Eastern. Go subscribe. YouTube, go subscribe to the Left Reckoning YouTube channel right now.
Right now. Do it. Like the stream. And then after you do that, go subscribe to Left Reckoning. So we want to give Matt a bump this week. And then, we'll just get Matt to like me a little more, because people don't realize, but we have a very tense relationship behind the scenes. Go subscribe to Left Reckoning. Obviously, the No McKee Show at 3 p.m. Anything else we want to plug, or shall we just head in?
Here we go.
All right.
Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude, you want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1 half. 5 8. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy!
Dance.
Ooh.
Rand Paul. I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabs.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up.
Ooh.
Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me...
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
Just kidding. It's me. I'm going to take some calls, do some videos, the whole shebang. Let's take this call here. 801, calling from an 801 number.
Is this me?
Yes, this is you. Who's this?
Holy shit, I'm the first caller. Gosh, damn, I'm lucky. What's up, Emma?
What's up? What's your name?
This is Gabriel from Salt Lake.
Gabriel from Salt Lake. How are you, man?
I'm doing good, and honestly, I haven't really been paying attention to politics lately. I used to watch this show like every day, But I know you're a big sports person, so I just wanted to call in and talk some shop with you.
Oh man,
I'm a Dolphins fan, and we just got announced that we're going to be playing the Giants next year for the 17th game. I want to know how you're feeling about that.
Well, I mean, I actually literally was just having this conversation this morning before I came to work. I will spare the rest of the audience too much Giants talk, but I actually, for the first time in a long time, have a good amount of optimism heading into the season. I think that I respect the hell out of what the Dolphins are doing in terms of just how they've built their team and accumulating draft picks and what they've done with the Laramie Tunsil trade and turned it into that many assets. I'm sorry, Gabriel. I really do not believe in Tua Tagovailoa.
Oh, come on.
Look, he's got no arm strength, bad size, kind of okay mobility, and I think that was an ownership pick, in my view. Like the idea that you really think, Gabriel, that he's going to be as good as what we're seeing with the Chargers with Justin Herbert.
Okay, and I got a hot take for you.
Sure.
I think Herbert is a good stats, bad team kind of guy. I think those are all just padded stats. He has great receivers. I think if you put him on the Dolphins with the receivers we had last year, I think he would look just as bad as Tua did. And by the way,
Ryan
Tua
Fitzpatrick looked a lot better than
Tua. Did you
Tua.
see the Arizona game?
I did. Man, look, they had to bring Ryan Fitzpatrick into close games, Gabriel, because Tua couldn't do it.
I know, but that was like a rare situation where your backup is so good, you might as well just try. And I mean, Tua
Ryan Fitzpatrick isn't Peyton Manning.
Okay, but he has some of the greatest moments in like recent football history. Like he beat the Patriots the final week that Tom Brady had a home game, and then I mean he just has those kind of moments. But I mean I'm not sitting here saying that like it was great that Tua got benched, but I just think you got to give him a shot because he really was just recovering from his injury last offseason. Now he gets to worry about actually football stuff.
It's fair to give him a shot. And I'm going to hang up on you in a sec because I feel bad for the rest of the listeners. My one point is I'm being real with you. I don't see it. I don't see the pop in his arm. I don't see any elite traits in his game, even though he seems like a really nice guy. So I appreciate the call.
It hurts to hear that.
Thanks so much, Gabriel.
Thank you.
Later.
And I haven't thought about the Dolphins since Ricky Williams.
Yeah, they're on the up and up. They got Brian Flores. They got Chris Greer at GM. They're really, I think, well-run organization outside of their quarterback selection last year. Calling from a 917 number.
Hi, it's me.
Hey, how are you? Yes, it's you. Who's this?
Hi, this is Jake the teacher.
Jake the teacher. Where are you from?
I'm from, I teach in the Bronx. I'm from the New York City area.
Nice.
I actually live in Rockland County. I never get a chance to call in or when I have school. So I'm glad I have spring break and I could make it on the air.
Awesome. So I'm sorry. Can you say your name again? I just want to remember it.
Jake the teacher.
Jake the teacher.
Yeah, I've called it before. Usually the fun half, but I've spoken to Sam, spoken to Michael. I write about education, mostly for the progressive. But I have, there's a big debate going on right now about standardized testing, which doesn't make it too much into the news. And I'm wondering if you have a view on the controversy, because testing is coming up soon for 3rd to 8th grade, and then there's also the regions in high school here in New York State. But people are saying during the pandemic it's a horrible idea. Kids are really behind, and we know this already. What are we really doing? There's a lot of stress. But also, Joe Biden promised to end standardized testing during the Democratic primary. And so this also represents a broken promise for him.
Yeah. So to me, I am, based on the limited information I have on what New York City's doing right now, and a lot of this is just through Sam because his kids are in school. So just take that with a grain of salt. Is that there should not be standardized testing this year. I mean, from what I hear from people I know who have kids, There's just not a lot of learning going on, or like it's not being digested in the same way. And I know that's not due to your efforts, which I'm sure are admirable, Jake the teacher. But it seems like just because of the disparity in experience and the availability of people to actually, or kids, I should say, to digest remote learning, it's going to be varying, and I'm sure you know this very well, between household to household. It doesn't seem like a good idea to include standardized testing this year, especially just because I think it what data has shown, and correct me if I'm wrong, it exacerbates conditions along racial lines particularly.
Yeah, well, that's the big controversy this year, because the Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona, goes on Chris Hayes' show, and it was very rare that you ever see anybody on network TV talk about standardized testing. But here's the secretary, and he said, how can you justify it in a year like this? And Cardona said something really interesting. And actually, Sam liked this tweet I saw online. The secretary said that we're going to be pushing out $130 billion in education aid through the ARP, and he said we need to know where children are at, because we need to use this money to direct it to those who are in the most need and who have fallen behind the most. And the reason why that was really odd is because there's no law that ties standardized testing to money. And actually, that was taken out of the law, because financial incentives were baked into No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top. And that was corrected in 2015. They took away power of the Secretary of Education to use carrots and sticks, in the states and in school districts. So everybody's shaking their head right now, like, what is he talking about? How are they going to use these test scores to dole out billions and billions of dollars? There's no law. There's no guidelines. There's just no information, and so the teachers are wondering, school administrators are wondering, how is he going to tie these test results to money? What do we have to do to get the money? Should we get everything wrong on purpose? I can tell my kids to do that. That's pretty easy.
Right.
It's really, really, we're in a really weird space now. And, we're waiting for Biden to talk about it, because really interesting, in 2019, December 2019, he went to, the teachers unions looking for their endorsement. And Bernie and Elizabeth Warren had just announced, that they were against standardized testing. Bernie had been saying it since 2016, but Warren had jumped in, and so Biden needed to say something too, because that was really important to teachers. And Biden said he will end standardized testing. It's on tape. We have it. I put it on a loop over and over.
Yeah.
And that was before the pandemic. So we're wondering, like, what's going on? Like, did he mean he was going to do it like later in his term, or it's really frustrating. It's really frustrating. So
yeah, I appreciate the call. I mean, I had honestly forgotten that was a campaign promise, but that makes sense that you would remember, just given your profession, and also now when you mentioned the teachers union endorsements, it has jogged my memory a bit. But yeah, I think that's probably something he would address later, just given what the priorities he's laid out are going to be within the timeline of the COVID pandemic. But that's something we have to hold him accountable for and keep an eye out for. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Talk to you again.
Have a good one. Bye.
Be good, Emma. Bye.
All right. I want to talk about, okay, so this is a political segment that we're about to do. It does involve some sports, but it's the Supreme Court. I really want to get to this. So, Currently, the Supreme Court is overseeing a case about college athlete compensation. And oddly, it looks like Brett Kavanaugh and Clarence Thomas are signaling that they're on the right side of this issue. And Stephen Breyer, not so much. Let's listen to what Brett Kavanaugh had to say this morning as this case is being litigated in front of the Supreme Court.
It does seem, as Justice Kagan and Justice Gorsuch suggested, Justice Alito, the schools are conspiring with competitors, agreeing with competitors, I'll say that, to pay no salaries to the workers who are making the schools billions of dollars on the theory that consumers want the schools to pay their workers nothing. And that just seems entirely circular and even somewhat disturbing.
I would very much agree that it's quite disturbing, Beer Boy Brett, but I didn't think it would be coming out of your mouth. And even Clarence Thomas, he writes, or he said, "It strikes me as odd that the coaches' salaries have ballooned and they are in the amateur ranks, as are the players," which is odd because this is a quote from the NCAA lawyer on this. "Our own view is if you allow them to be paid, the students, they will be spending even more time on their athletics and even less time on their academics." Let me just dispel with that immediately. These are semi-professional athletes who go to joke classes in order to still stay at the university. They're all hoping to make it big in the professional sphere. They are training for their profession as a professional athlete. So the idea that this is a student-athlete experience for students participating in the top Division I college programs, raking in millions upon millions for their universities, is ridiculous. The NCAA is trying to argue that this is an academic pursuit, which is ludicrous, and that it's amateur and thus not a business, meaning athletes don't need to be compensated. So then why do the coaches need to be? Why do the coaches need to be? I'll just lay this out for you. Nick Saban makes $9.1 million a year to lead the Alabama football program, which rakes in, I think, I don't know if this is revenue or whatever, but it's around $100 million a year. Jim Harbaugh, who coaches the Michigan football team, makes $8 million a year. John Calipari, who coaches the Kentucky basketball team, in March Madness, as they're doing contact tracing and electronic monitoring bracelets on athletes who aren't being compensated, makes $8 million a year. But let's listen to Stephen Breyer, who seemingly is siding against the workers, who are the non-compensated athletes in this case. And we have Kavanaugh and Clarence Thomas, who are signaling the right kind of ideas. By the way, if we bring them a union case that's outside of college athletics, I don't know if they'd have this persuasion, but still, they're on the right side, and this is the trash that Breyer is spewing.
This is not an ordinary product. This is an effort to bring into the world something that's brought joy and all kinds of things to millions and millions of people, and it's only partly economic. Okay? So I worry a lot about judges getting into the business of deciding how amateur sports should be run.
So he's already conceding that this is an amateur sport. Again, if this is amateur sports, Nick Saban can't be making millions of dollars a year. Jim Harbaugh can't be making millions of dollars a year. John Calipari can't be making millions of dollars a year. They say that this is a part of an academic experience, and that's why you're able to give players just a scholarship and nothing and maybe a few stipends. But the problem is that this is a reminiscent phenomenon of old school exploitation of often black kids, often poor kids, who absolutely need this opportunity to go pro, which is what they're planning on doing, because of contracts and deals made by the NFL and the NBA with colleges, that for the NBA to enter, which is likely going to change soon because the NBA is more progressive than the NFL, you have to do at least 1 year of college basketball or you're an international player. That's a deal made. So you have to put your body on the line for 1 year. You could to completely blow out your ACL or your Achilles or whatever it is, and you could be one of the most talented athletes in the country, and you put all of your efforts into this and never get compensated for it, while maybe your jersey without the name on the back sells and tickets sell millions and millions of dollars for your university, you never get compensated. And so they're exploiting college athletes on the hope that they have in their souls to go pro afterwards. And that could eventually not happen. But while they're exploiting that hope, they're making millions upon millions of dollars. And the coaches who can monitor them as long as they wish for whatever amount of time and treat them in certain ways and make sure that they basically ride them and do whatever they want to them without oversight while they're making millions of dollars. And these coaches are pretty much exclusively all white. And it's a really, really sick dynamic. And there have been efforts in the past. Northwestern college football players tried to unionize. But the issue is that once you leave college, there's so much union turnover that it's not as sustainable. And so there's no one to advocate for these players. And they're eager, and they're young, and they're often black, and they're often from poor areas. And they're trying so hard not to rock the boat because they want to go pro and often make millions of dollars for their family and change and have generational wealth for everybody that they love and that they know, because they're a business of one person. And that's what the NCAA exploits. It is a deeply, deeply messed up system that also involves labor and discussions around that. So this isn't a purely sports segment. It's literally being argued in front of the Supreme Court right now. California is currently in the process of allowing college players to be compensated, and the NCAA is scared shitless that this will spread elsewhere. So anyway, Brett Kavanaugh on the right side of this for some reason. We'll see how he eventually rules. But this is an under-the-radar, extremely exploitative part of American society, and it's why I have a very, very difficult time supporting college sports. These are minor leagues, effectively. Minor leagues, and they get paid zero as the university and the college coaches make millions upon millions of dollars. There needs to be some sort of percentage system because, say the women's volleyball player isn't going to get paid the same amount as, the starting quarterback at Ohio State or something, right? So it's different, but
well, I think you do a revenue sharing generally among athletes, and then star athletes can do, like, they also should be able to endorsement and that sort of activity, I think, right? Like, and the NCAA just wants to allow the endorsements because then you split the workforce. You split the stars from the rest of the athletes, which is, classic. That's exactly what they want to do. Because if you look at even professional baseball, for instance, the minor leagues, they're unionized, but that union is not they aren't represented by the pros. And that they get a much worse shake. Until you make the pros and get into that league, then you're pretty much screwed. So you don't want this stuff split. And the more it's split, the more it benefits the owners.
That's exactly right. And right now they don't even allow, Reggie Bush got his Heisman taken away for accepting a car or something like that during that time. They are trying to concede that in order to have everybody look away from the big part of this, which is actually fairly compensating athletes for the spectacle that they put on. And even in the pandemic, when they said that they were going to lose so much money and they put these players in harm's way without really adequate testing strategies and still tried to claim that it was a part of the student athlete experience, still tried to claim that as campuses were closed down, they're having training camp for college football, they're still trying to claim that they shouldn't compensate these players. It is an absolute disgusting aspect of our society. And, I know it's sports related, but it's also just about the intersectionality of race in this country, the remnants of slave culture, specifically in the South, with universities like Alabama, Clemson, whatever, and labor rights as well. So,
also, I should just say the miners aren't actually even unionized. Bobby Big Wheel, Aaron Kleinman tweeted this out, which I think is a good bow on it, which is we stacked the Supreme Court full of nerds who went to Ivy League schools. While this is a disaster on most issues, they have no problems taking on the NCAA.
Yeah, fine. I'll take what I can get. Don't care how we get it, but players need to be paid. All right. I don't know. I'm not reading that word. Get Dave Zirin to discuss the name, image, likeness development for NCAA athletes. I interviewed Dave Zirin before. He's, a really strong advocate on this issue. Leckhead Larry says, why does libertarianism always inevitably end up on taking issue with age of consent laws? I didn't know that. Nice Guy says, counter argument, football and basketball pays for all the other college sports. The hundreds of millions of dollars that they rake in, plus paying the players a wage for their labor, will still be sustainable. They just may not be able to get the 14th pool inside of the football facility.
Yeah, I mean, now all this money, you look at who the highest paid state employees for any given state, and it's a coach almost always for a public university. And that's where that money is going now, because those coaches often have access to getting the players. They're mainly there for their recruiting abilities.
Yep. Joanna writes, Emma, Matt, Brendan, and Griscom, you all should get together with Jason Miles from This Is Revolution for a Left NFL Fantasy League. He's mentioned it multiple times and it sounds like fun. Don't cede sports to the right. I work on not ceding sports to the right every single day of my life, and I really think, and I don't know if you'd be down for this, Matt, I would really, really like to do a Majority Report Fantasy League in the fall, but...
It's been a while since I've done fantasy, and I mean, I was doing it when I was in college, and frankly, like the amount of time I spent listening to fantasy podcasts and going on like Fantasy Pros and checking stats for guys who I should pick up on waivers. I don't know. I have a much different life now than I did then.
I have the same life, so I will start the league even if Matt is not interested. And maybe we could do it with just some of the viewers. That would be really fun.
It's possible though.
Yes. Well, he's a maybe. Stop the Meal says, what's up with the governor of South Dakota wasting time arguing about sneakers with a rapper on Twitter instead of managing her state? What's up with her is that she wants to run for president. Quinn from Indianapolis says, no need to apologize for covering this. It is a labor issue. It absolutely is. Georgia voter 420 years says, if Kagan and Thomas can set the edges and Roberts can hold up in coverage, I feel like the court has a great chance to beat the spread. I mean, just like giving me what I want with the IMs. C.H. Anderson 96 says, what are your thoughts on Matthew McConaughey possibly running for Texas governor? I mean, I would obviously prefer an actual progressive, but our current governor is literal trash, and I don't know who can beat him. At least with McConaughey, we have a shot. Thoughts? Is that a thing? Is that something you've heard?
Wait, what? Sorry, repeat that.
Matthew McConaughey?
What did he do?
Running for governor of Texas?
I have not heard that. That's news to me.
I'm just going to do a quick Google search. Texas governor. I mean, wow, Matthew McConaughey from The Guardian seriously considering run for Texas governor. I can't get past the paywall. That is nuts. And I've heard he's a nice guy. I have no idea what his politics are. So that's
I don't think super great. I'm not sure though about that. I know Free State of Jones was supposed to be a movie with good politics, but I think I've heard some expressions from McConaughey that I think aren't great. But I mean, it wouldn't be shocking. This is America. Celebrity candidates are, I think, they're going to be with us. I mean, Trump's success, obviously, but also you look at Ronald Reagan or Arnold Schwarzenegger or Jesse Ventura. Yeah, it wouldn't be shocking.
Doesn't belong. I think it's Jesse Ventura, but
I mean, frankly, if I had to vote, might be Ventura.
But my point is that the ones that have had like success in that way, it's usually Republicans who pretend to hate celebrities.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Jesse Ventura. I forgot that he was governor of Minnesota, but I just mean the he's more of the exception to the rule than anything. All right, shall we do another clip? I'm going to look at what we've got. Hold on one second.
Want to do this Lil Nas X Satan shoes?
Sure, hold on one second. Ooh, I'm interested about this. Hold on one second. Okay, great. This is from yesterday, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, conservative media is up in arms about Lil Nas X. He's made a purposefully, I guess, controversial music video where he gives Satan a lap dance. I find this kind of pop culture to be pretty awesome just based on the fact that it does trigger conservatives, and also because I love when someone like Lil Nas X, who is gay, is able to express himself in these kinds of ways, and then the cherry on top is conservative outrage. Let's listen to what Newsmax had to say, and specifically Turning Point USA's Alex Clark on Newsmax.
All right, Alex, I follow you on Instagram. You're always got fancy sneakers on. Are you buying a pair of these Satan shoes, these Little Nas X, $1,000 a piece with blood in the heel? And Little Nas apparently is a self-proclaimed child rapper who raps for kids. I mean, what is going on, Alex?
It is just incredible to me that the...
So I should have said, this is a rumored sneaker because he gave Satan a lap dance. He's like, we'll put blood in shoes and sell it. He is purposefully trolling the right wing, and they are just giving into it. And yes, what the biggest question of the day is, would Turning Point USA's Alex Clark buy a specific pair of sneakers? This is important.
Apparently is a self-proclaimed child rapper who raps for kids. I mean, what is going on, Alex?
It is just incredible to me.
Kids do love Old Town Road.
Yeah, I was about to say, right. Is he a child rapper? Is this Lil Romeo?
If you search Lil Nas X Old Town Road school gymnasium, it'll be one of the happiest videos you'll ever see in your life, actually.
And it's adorable.
It is just incredible to me that the people that are defending this on Twitter, the leftist blue check mark SJW progressive types, are saying that this isn't offensive, it's art, we shouldn't be offended, and yet they were the ones that were morally outraged by Trump's tweets, right? Like, we had to get Trump out of office because he's so immoral and he's so controversial, and yet this is the kind of thing that they defend. But look, we cannot be surprised that our culture has ended up in this sort of degenerate type of state when we have had churches locked down for a year. Nobody's been able to go to church. We live in a culture that is obsessed with abortion and obsessed with celebrating death. So having sneakers that have real drops of human blood in them that celebrate Satan, I'm not super shocked, but I do.
Well, I mean, just to be accurate, reportedly only one drop in each shoe, so don't want to.
Well, yeah, but that's enough to make sure that Satan comes out of the ground.
I'm not super shocked, but I do think it is important to point out that Nike had nothing to do with this. They're suing the company that bought their sneakers, that repurposed them to then sell these with Lil Nas X. So it isn't Nike, but it is still pretty shocking.
Well, thank you for pointing that out. That is the disclaimer here. And of course, they canceled Captain Underpants, but they don't care about these 666 of these blood-soaked sneakers. I don't know.
Blood-soaked.
This is literally designed, like, the trap is right in front of you. It's not even covered with some sort of grass or straw like an Indiana Jones movie. You're just seeing the hole in the ground and walking right into it. He is trolling you. He wants this reaction. Lil Nas X isn't that talented. He seems like a fun guy, though. He's trying to get people to talk about this. That was the whole reason that he did that video, and I love it, but they're so triggered by it, it's unbelievable. And my favorite part too is when Alex Clark says that, look, they were grossed out by Donald Trump's tweets, but they're supporting Lil Nas X. Can you tell me the difference between Donald Trump and Lil Nas X, a child rapper, as they say? One was the president. I found 80% of Trump's tweets to be very amusing. But there's a bit of a difference in power, I would say.
Are you familiar with Alex Clark?
Not familiar enough.
So she does the Poplitics for TPUSA. Here's a taste of one episode of that. I think people will enjoy.
I have a new saying for you. It's called the meat sweats. When the show is beefy, juicy, and meaty, I get the meat sweats. We're gonna have the meat sweats together today. Kinda sexy.
Here come the meat sweats.
This Riverdale actress is busting child predators when she's not filming. Obama is the lead advisor for those NBA protests. The Brits are coming for your Facetune, and Mariah Carey just buried Ellen alive with this new unflattering story. I'm Alex Clark, and this is Poplitics.
So yeah, that's Alex Clark.
So she's like a Snapchat Turning Point USA person. So that
and that was episode 208. And it got 625 views. So she's not massively successful. I do want to say that. But I also want to say that apparently Obama is the one advising the NBA protests. That was a bad thing. And that was like, he neutered the NBA protests. But yeah, I mean.
But my favorite part of that is like the deliberate attempt to kind of imitate the cadence of an extra or, Entertainment Tonight.
Talk Soup, yeah.
Talk Soup. It like the cadence of those people is already kind of what my nightmares are made of. Never thought it could get worse than that same kind of speech pattern being filled with Turning Point USA talking points. And probably it seems like it's used on Snapchat, which I don't really use anymore. I did when I was younger, but that's for kids. Like, that is targeted for kids. Speaking of indoctrination.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that is a good point, because that is they're really sensitive to what Lil Nas X does, because he talks to kids, because that's what they try to do. This is why, like, Tim Pool talks all about Marvel movies all the time, right? Like, their frame of reference is that of a child, and yeah, you want to get to them early, basically.
Yeah, I mean, they get projection per usual. All right. Okay, trying to think of what we should get to next.
Navarro?
Should we show this Matt Gaetz thing? I am do a second thing. I'm going to read some IMs for right now, because I'm not sure if Matt has it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is weird. I don't like this, but yeah.
I don't like it either, but I think he posted this on his social media.
I think we shouldn't, just because we'd have to blur the faces.
Yes, you're right. All right, guys, look it up. Matt Gaetz has a bunch of tweets, and we just don't know who these girls are, right? But he tweeted from his accounts, like, going to help a girl out who was being bullied, and, good lunch table at this high school today, and just took a picture with a bunch of young girls there. And
yeah.
It's a weird thing to put on your social media, especially as a sitting congressman.
Well, it's also like we can play this video just so we can get a little bit what we're talking about.
We won't show the picture of the high school girls, but we will show this other video he put up.
Yeah, because like, even if this who he's talking about in this story has nothing to do with the story ongoing, it's still inappropriate to talk to a high school girl about the vitriol and the type of comments you're receiving as a congressperson online. Like, just imagining the type of things I would say to Matt Gaetz if I got access to his, like, direct messages, for instance. are not the sort of things that Matt Gaetz should be showing a teenage girl.
Yeah, maybe just act like a 38-year-old man as opposed to trying to make some sort of peer-like relationship with a teenage girl.
It's too intimate.
It's way too intimate.
There was one little girl I met at lunch that made an impact on me. She said that she'd been bullied at school and that there were people who made a Facebook page to pick on her. It's really sad the extent to which that has become a new tool that people use to be mean to each other in high school. And so to cheer her up, I opened up my social media and I let her read some of the things that some of you write about me that at times is not so nice. She got a good laugh about it. And I told her that, look, if somebody is writing something ugly about you on social media, you need to go out there and live your life and be successful and prosperous and kind to others. If someone else hates themselves so much that they would go and use the internet as a way to try to bring discomfort on someone else's life, that says a lot more about them.
Wow, we're just like each other.
What if they're making fun of you for not being successful or prosperous?
Then, I mean, then you're shit out of luck, Matt, right? Like, if you don't have $1 million in the bank, you probably deserve to get bullied. That's what Matt Gaetz would say. But I'm the fact that he has multiple posts on his social media about visiting high schools, high school girls in general, it just seems like there may be a pattern. And given what we discovered yesterday, it's just creepy. It's just creepy. And he's trying to claim like this is some extortion attempt. I would love for him to provide the evidence of the alleged FBI official who is extorting him, because there's not going to be any.
I mean, if it's Bill Barr, let's see them fight it out.
Yeah. Yeah. You can't claim that it's a political hit job when the Trump administration started the investigation into you. Sean from NorCal says the lumber companies have used blood to make glue for plywood manufacture for years. Is that true?
Wow, that's why everyone's houses are haunted.
That's everyone's. VE says, kind of worried about the Lil Nas X conservative trolling. It distracts from any actual policy and feeds into conservative mindset. The pundits aren't being trolled. Rather, they're glad to fill up airtime with culture war BS than anything real. More people will go to the polls remembering Satan's shoes than who voted for the COVID bill. I don't know if that's true. Just because way too many leaps from Lil Nas X to Joe Biden, and the people who already are making that leap are already gone.
Yeah, I think it's not... for their culture war issues to be so unaligned with the actual policy debates going on is not useful for them. Like, it's better if they could somehow, portray HR1 as satanic now. But like, it's just too peripheral, in my opinion, anyway.
Polanki says athletes need to be compensated like other workers and not disproportionately for the value they create. Teachers and doctors add far more value to society. Look, to me, I don't give a shit about how much money athletes take from the private owners that own teams. It should be higher, the proportion that they take from those owners. That's such a niche industry, and it's really about billionaire owners who own NFL, NBA, whatever, NHL teams, who hoard their wealth and have the ability. No one buys an NHL or a professional sports team in order to make money. Oftentimes, if you have money laying around. So the players should take as much of a proportion of that when they're only playing for a finite period of time that they absolutely can.
Yeah, I mean, the practical way to address some of that concern is to just raise higher end taxes, so that the extreme levels of wealth don't build up so much. And yes, pay people like teachers and doctors and nurses and stuff more. Right. But as Emma said, most important now is that there is a massive pile of money being made by people's labor, those basketball players or football players, and it is being put into the hands of capitalists for them to do what they want with it. And that's bad, and that needs to be changed. So, like, overall, like, says, once we can normalize wages across all industries, we have that kind of power. We can have these conversations. But right now, there's a big fat stack of money being put into like Donald Sterling's and people like that's pockets, and it shouldn't be.
Exactly. That's the point. In the short term, the conversation is every NFL player or NBA or whatever player should be taking as much money as they can from the owners. And every time a player holds an owner over the barrel in negotiations, you side with that player.
I mean, there should frankly, I think, be no owners. Like we have this model, it would be easily done. I think you have a mixed municipal and player ownership model somehow, and these people, like, I don't know what an owner does. Right. Yeah.
Except, right. Well, we
sit atop a massively inflating asset that they're going to sell to a different owner in 10 years.
I mean, the owner of the Houston Texans, who died, now his son's in charge, said when the Kaepernick protests were happening, we can't have the inmates running the prison. That's
right.
How most NFL owners feel, and most owners of teams feel about their players, specifically if they're black. And it's way worse in college because they don't even pay them. BJ Arnie from Denmark, I'm sorry. Hi, Emma and Automatlek. I loved the interview. He touched on a lot of my own thinking as to the nonviolent movement of the past. The strength of people like Gandhi and Dr. King were that they had the power to control the violence. Keep up the good work, comrades. Let's take another call. Calling from a 901 number, Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, is this me? Can you hear me?
Yes, this is you.
Awesome. Yeah, this is Joe from Memphis. I just wanted to call specifically about something Matt said on Left Reckoning the other day. So,
sure.
I know he's all about solidarity and all of these things, but he was talking about the small markets, like the Memphis Grizzlies shouldn't have a team, but like Seattle should. So wanted to give Matt a chance to defend himself there. Where's the solidarity for the Memphis Grizzlies?
Well, I mean, first of all, I never said that. I prompted Waz to talk about getting a team back in Seattle. And I know that Waz is not above taking shots at Oklahoma City, for instance, and saying how he'd rather be in Seattle to cover that game. He took it in a different direction and said, actually, he's been impressed by how much those teams mean to those sorts of communities. And in Oklahoma, particularly, I think like after the bombing, for instance, like on a national level, to have that sort of identity is really important. But I think a couple things. One is I think there should be a team in Memphis. I don't know if they should be called the Grizzlies, but I feel like you don't want. There's a concern that the league could get overextended with too many teams. And I don't know. I'm of two minds of that. I mean, Minnesota teams are very often threatened with the same thing that happened to Seattle. If they don't, for instance, put up a new stadium. So that's why there's new stadiums in Minnesota now. I would go back to the years of like the 30s and 40s where you had minor league teams that were all owned by cities, and that was like a big part of the public budget was to play athletes to entertain people, and then everyone can have their team. But as far as like the major league, I don't know. I'm not super anti the Memphis Grizzlies. I'll just say that.
I mean, yeah, it's like never should have left Seattle. That's another problem with private ownership of teams, is that they can move to a place that's gonna give them a better deal on the stadium or whatever,
right?
Whenever they want. Joe, appreciate the call. I feel like we can't do any more sports talk, or people might keel over and die, or just storm the studio with pitchforks. But I appreciate the call.
Yeah, for sure. Appreciate all you guys.
Thanks so much, man. Bye.
Also, John Morant is awesome.
Yeah, well, that was a tough draft for the Knicks. 3. Zion went 1. RJ's good, but
he's neither of those guys.
I don't want to talk about it. Calling from a 616 number.
Yeah, hi.
Who's
Can
this?
you hear me?
Yes, who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, my name is Nick. I'm calling from Michigan.
Nick from Michigan. What you like to talk about today?
Well, thanks for taking my call. I haven't been listening a whole lot lately, so maybe some of this has already been addressed, and I apologize if it has, but I guess, considering the shooting that happened the other week, I'm again wondering when Democrats and liberals are going to acknowledge the cognitive dissonance they seem to have between the gun control issue and the gun violence issue, because, I don't mean to write off like mass shootings at all. I want them to stop as well, but I look at the numbers and it's like mass shootings account for 0.2% of gun deaths. And I live in a neighborhood that, there's always been shootings, but last summer was really bad. There were a lot of times 3 shootings a day, and most gun deaths are, 60% are, I think, handguns, 60% are suicides. And I really think Democrats want to ignore the actual gun violence issue, because if they addressed it, it means they would have to pay attention to, one, mental health care issues related to suicide and stuff like this, and 2, economic issues that contribute to handgun homicides in my neighborhood. And it just seems kind of silly. I think I was reading a DiMaggio report from a couple years ago that stated even during the assault weapons ban in the 90s, they reduced mass killings by 50%, but at a 0.2%, mortality level, that's 0.1. And so, I wonder, all of the political energy, all of the money that goes into, limiting high-capacity magazines, what's it for? I mean, if they don't start addressing the underlying issues that actually lead to, gun deaths, as well as trying to get a handle on gun control, it's just going to continue to be, a flashpoint for bipartisanship and for, Republicans portraying the left is trying to take our guns away and, usurp power or something like that. So I guess, I don't know, what are your thoughts? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you see what I'm saying? Has this been addressed recently? Has there been an interview I can go back to and listen to or anything?
I think you're definitely right. I don't think there's been an interview that you can listen to about this specifically. But look, I think the issue is the filibuster. And someone like Joe Manchin in West Virginia, who's not even supportive of background checks. I'm not even sure what his, I'm blanking on what his position is right now, although that can change, in terms of assault weapons bans. Let me look it up.
Yeah, but I just want to say, before while you're doing that, I mean, the caller is right that there is way too much focus put on these sorts of cases and these sorts of high capacity bans that, I mean, I think would not have a massive effect in stopping a lot of gun violence. I think we are a massively gun soaked country. And what the caller said, the mental health stuff and all of the actual care in the community needs to be done. And I personally would de-emphasize the types of gun control measures, especially the way they're stated, where it is just focusing on these sorts of, again, things that I don't think people should be able to own. But I think it does become more of a partisan, almost like a fundraising / email gathering operation.
Absolutely. I mean, that's it has been, I think, emotionally exploited by the Democratic Party, for which they've done absolutely nothing for it, and refuse to get rid of the filibuster in order to even address it on the technocratic level. But if we're talking about the actual alienation and the harm that society is causing that leads to gun violence on a whole, not just mass shooting deaths, you're correct that the Democratic Party is not interested in currently having that conversation and won't be for a while.
Right. They seem to only be interested in, when a mass shooting, they want people to basically be able to shop and buy things freely, which, everyone should be able to do, I guess. But it's only a problem when somebody goes into a shopping mall or into a public place. It's not a problem when, I'm in my bedroom at night worried about catching a stray, which would involve them, providing jobs in the community, bolstering education, like these kinds of measures that they're totally disinterested in. So I wish that more pressure was put on that establishment to like as long as they're going to talk about gun control, that's fine. I mean, I'm a gun owner. I like to shoot, and I honestly have dealt with some issues that make me feel like I need to carry one, but I'm also rational. Like, I don't want mass shootings and I want gun violence to decrease. So as long as they're going to address that issue, I think we need to put more pressure on them to really talk about the issues that underlie gun violence itself, and to talk about handguns, which massively outweigh like these mass shootings are like such a minuscule, not to say that the deaths associated are unimportant at all, but like honestly, like how much political energy and how much money is funneled into like limiting high capacity magazines that would do nothing for the issues I'm talking about here today.
I think right, and it just quickly, Matt, it's meant to animate the new base of the Democratic Party that they've been trying to covet, which is like suburban moms.
Yeah, I'm super suspicious of it, which is why I like gun control is not a political priority for me, because I distrust like the Bloomberg Borg that is, I think, using it in a way that I think, one, is massively unhelpful just politically, nationally. And two, yeah, as we've said, like doesn't actually address the underlying issue of, gun violence in this country, and which can only be addressed, or which should, I think, best be addressed by measures that need to be done anyway, like addressing mental health and poverty and those sorts of issues of deprivation and want, and not by just saying, and look, if you can pass legislation about background checks or whatever, fine. But I don't think I wouldn't make it a campaign issue. I don't think it should be like the reason. I think in terms of like getting rid of the filibuster, I don't want guns to come up the first thing out of people's the Democrats' mouths. I want it to be about the PRO Act and about HR1, like voting, and I don't want it to be about so we can take something away from you, because I just think it's just objectively a managerial stance, and that's not my politics. I understand that certain management has to take place in a republic, and that again, like background checks and if you can ban these high capacity stuff, whatever, like fine. But again, like do it under the dark of night if you can. Like, it's the idea that this is something to run elections on, I think it's proven not successful.
I don't think it was that big of an issue in the last campaign. And they're not saying that that's why there was success, but appreciate the call, Nick. Thank you.
Yeah.
Have a good one.
You too.
So Elemeno says, handguns are the source of the vast majority of gun violence. It's true, and Democrats laser focus on my beloved assault weapons. Matt doesn't believe we should be able to own assault weapons. I thought he was the furthest left now. Oh, well, I still love him. Not sure what that means, and I don't think that's what...
I mean, I'm open to the idea... Look, I think gun control in this country has a bad history that goes after like Black people often, right? Like, I think that's what would happen. Like, that's what always happens, right? Like, who are the people that get busted with gun charges just growing up in pop culture? It's always like sport. It's always like athletes and rappers and stuff, right? It's Black people, in other words. It's never like politicians carried it into Congress or whatever. And so I am, again, like, not, gun control is not in my politics. It's not something I emphasize. And I personally, yeah, I'm not a gun control. I don't know how you got that.
I did an interview for Ring of Fire last week on the basically mass and carceral element of the Violence Against Women Act, and how it had really negative effects in many ways on women of color specifically, and how it kind of militarized violence against women, which originated from some of the left-wing movements coming out of the 60s and 70s, and injected law enforcement into it. And you just have to, when you're taking that managerial approach to basically some law enforcement and enforcing gun ownership in that way, you have to worry that it's not implemented in a racist incarceration-based way that is punitive and not helpful for those underlying elements of society that the call.
Yeah. The punitive approach I would take would be to nationalize all the gun industries. And if you're going to buy a gun, you're going to buy it from the government. And I don't know if that should be allowed. We'll see. I frankly do think that there is a deterrent effect. I don't think people should have any illusions about, buying a gun, whether it's for a revolution or for even self-defense, because I think just statistically, the chance that you accidentally do something is more likely than either of the things, the good uses for it. But I do think there is something to be said about community deterrence. And if like the Black Panthers, for instance, if you watch them, they're all very, very disciplined in terms of muzzle control and gun safety. And I think that is something that an oppressive police force, for instance, takes seriously. So I guess I'm not cut and dried on this. I don't think people should go get guns, but I also think it might be worthwhile to become familiar with safety around them.
Yeah. Kyle, I'm looking for this caller, not seeing it. All right, let's take a. We'll do a clip right now. This Peter Navarro clip is pretty unhinged, Matt. So the advisors from the Trump administration COVID task force are in the news recently because they are trying to make themselves sound a lot less culpable and pin it on each other and pin it on Trump, who, yes, it's on Trump. But Peter Navarro is no angel. And he reminded us of this by going on, what show is this? I think it was Newsmax
it's Fox News Primetime, actually.
No, it's it's Fox News Primetime, but the kind of very little pushback that you would now expect from Newsmax, at least Fox gives an iota. Peter Navarro said a bunch of outrageous things that have been countlessly disproven about Dr. Fauci. Who else?
The father of Fauci's the father of the actual virus. Fauci's the guy. This virus, according to Bob Redfield at the Centers for Disease Control, came from the Wuhan lab. And basically, we had Fauci not only funding that lab with American.
Pause it. Okay. Yes, a former CDC director. This is a part of the CNN package of interviews that happened over the weekend about the Trump administration's COVID-19 response, because CNN must ride the Trump administration and the views that they got them until the end of time. The Redfield guy, the former CDC director who said he thought it originated in the lab and that it was just a theory and that he was allowed to have theories, that's what he said. That is contradicted by constant reports. Thorough reports about the origination of the virus. There has been a thorough audit and overview of where coronavirus originated. They now believe international scientists and a coalition of people have thought that the most likely outcome was that a bat transmitted it to a second animal, which then transmitted it to human beings. So that it was a bat, then eaten by an animal, then eaten by a person through the wildlife trade in China, and then it spread throughout the globe. The virus originating in a lab is considered to be one of the least likely outcomes possible. And yet, conservatives and idiots like Peter Navarro are hinging on this one guy who basically threw it out there incredibly carelessly in order to, I don't know, make some news for himself, which has been contradicted by countless other scientists. They're hinging on that because they want to make it about China and they want to continue to spur up anti-Asian hate and then use China against Biden. That's going to be the new thing. Continue.
Disease control came from the Wuhan lab. And basically, we had Fauci not only funding that lab with American taxpayer dollars, he authorized this thing called gain of function research. He allowed the Chinese Communist Party, the People's Liberation Army, to genetically engineer a virus using gain of function. I call it the Fauci virus now. If he wants to be the father of something, he's the father of the virus that's killed over 500,000 Americans.
Well, Peter, we're still trying to get to the bottom of that, and we're definitely going to bring you back when we get more information on it. But you're right. There's a lot of questions out there. Peter, I can't thank you enough for joining me today. Always a treat.
Yeah. Why did he stand so far away from the microphone there? I've got to say, he was like, he looked like a car salesman saying, here, can you go back to that? Look how far he is. I want you to come buy a Nissan. I want you in my door. We've got the best prices on Long Island. Go to his one shot. It's just like a little bit far away. It's further down.
It's weird saluting.
Yeah, I know, but like in the center of it, I'm hung up on this. I've never seen. I digress. We can go back. But anyway, the man is absolutely insane, and don't listen to what this guy Redfield's saying. The broad consensus by scientists is that this did not originate in a lab, and you know, I've been criticized for pointing out, and I don't think it's legitimate, but it is me, the human rights abuses towards the Uyghur Muslims in China, right? Not that the United States doesn't do so, but I just think it's a relevant topic and something that should be discussed. And people have said, oh, that's drumming up a kind of Red Scare thing with China, right? No, that's what that's doing. That's what Peter Navarro's doing. That's what Republicans are doing, right? They are trying to make COVID into some sort of smoking gun in which they can implicate China and then actually ramp up tariff wars, but in some psycho's mind, maybe like Peter Navarro, some psycho's mind, some actually ground war potentially. There is an element of Red Scarishness that we are seeing, and it's basically pertaining to COVID and then to trade. But we're, I think, very far off from any sort of military conflict with China, just based on the size of China and our size. It would be so catastrophic that even the biggest warmongers in our country aren't, I think, seriously considering it right now. But with that being said, the virus most likely originated in the way I said, from a bat to another host to a human being. And anytime you hear conservatives citing the outliers in these studies, because that's how you get noticed, by the way, is if you don't go along with the broad consensus and you say it originated in the lab. That's the incentive for that. Anytime you hear that, just understand that that's meant to elicit some sort of emotional response from the viewer.
Yeah, I mean, there might not be a war on the offing. I do think that there is, like, the bipartisan nature of the one-upsmanship about who can be tougher on China is really troubling. And I also think that is to the extent that anyone in the Biden administration or the Democrats plays into it, that they have culpability when it comes to the attacks on Asian people in this country. Because like, it's like the China virus thing. Yeah, Navarro is completely doing that. But I do think that there is like there's culpability all around here, and the Democrats have a history of trying to look tough and not be perceived weak when they should not care about that. And like, if what's going on with the Uyghurs should be investigated, but I do think it is difficult to untangle from this broader these emphases, like a lot of the reporting on Uyghurs comes from people who are right, like even like is distance. It's not by CNN. It's CNN can't confirm this, but here's a source that has placed it right. And when it's tied to NGOs and stuff like that, like it's like the China stuff is really difficult right now, and I think everything needs to be you need to look at this, read the full stories, and see what the sources are, because there is a definite like I mean, these are the two world powers, managing each other basically, and you need to figure out what's being used and what's real. So yeah.
Yeah. This will be our final call of the day. Calling from an 860 number. Calling from an 860 number. You are the final call of the day. Or I'm sorry, 806.
Hey, this is Affably Trill from Mississippi.
Affably
I didn't think I was going to get in. Yeah, sure. I'm from Mississippi. I had a discussion a couple weeks back about Medicaid expansion in the state, kind of about like class and race, and then like the rhetoric that state officials had about not expanding it. And I just wanted to say, it's pretty complex, and y'all had a solid discussion about it, but there were a couple of points I wanted to make. First of all, like the main rhetorical thing that people really go for is it's an expansion of Obamacare. So there's an inherently racist part of their opposition, but they also point to some that it would cost the state more, when in fact, actually over time, I think right now Mississippi spends about 20 cents on the dollar for Medicaid coverage. And even though federal government will cover it for, I think it's 2 years, 100%, in the end, what Mississippi will be paying is about 8 cents on the dollar for all Medicaid coverage, not just for the expansion. So, I mean, it's an inherently racist, classist thing, and there's a couple of interesting things too I wanted to talk about involving like kind of how the class structure works here. I'm from Texas, and it's just interesting to see how, it's not just this disdain for the poor. I mean, I think you said, Emma, that it was like this us versus them mentality, racist mentality.
I think I may have, but I can't.
Yeah,
I can't
you
be sure.
said your sisters had worked in prisons in Louisiana, and that they had communicated this, and it is palpable here. Moving from Texas, plenty of racism, plenty of problems, but like it is just like, I mean, it's in the air. The air is thick with it. It's not just thick with humidity; it's thick with racism. So, class plays part of it, but like so many people in this state view themselves as, white trash. So it really just ultimately comes down to racism. It has nothing to do with fiscal responsibility. And in terms of it of people not being accountable to the electorate, that again goes back to the racism of Jim Crow and also of our voting system. We were the only state that didn't expand voting rights during COVID. We didn't have no excuse absentee balloting. We have no early voting, and we're the only state where you had to vote on election day during COVID. So, all that comes down to just flat out racism. So
yeah. I appreciate the call. It's good to get your perspective, just, because it's especially, you living in Mississippi, and I see that you're calling from Twitch. So thanks for watching us on Twitch.
Oh yeah. Shout out Twitch chat. But anyways, I could talk forever about the class system, how it works with, the planter class versus poor white trash versus, or the people who view themselves as poor white trash, even though they're middle class people with like $50,000 Suburbans.
Right.
Anyways, thank y'all for everything you do, and have a good rest of your afternoon.
Have a good one. Thanks so much. All right, guys, we will read some IMs and get out of here. All right, I said no more sports, but I have to respond to this. As bad as Tua looked last year, he didn't average 2 interceptions or fumbles per game like Daniel Jones has for his career. Okay. Daniel Jones is better than Tua. I can already say it right now. Daniel Jones has some elite traits. He has 0 interceptions, throwing downfield over 20 plus yards. He has pinpoint accuracy downfield, which is really important. I'm not saying he's going to be a great quarterback, but he also he's a better straight line runner than Tua. He's faster. So, and he's bigger. He's 6'5", and he has a more traditional quarterback frame. Daniel Jones has been asked to do more as well than Tua Tagovailoa. But point taken, I'm not sold on Daniel Jones yet, but I will say, you can call me arrogant about this, but I think I know a little bit about football. I called Josh Allen as being the best quarterback in that class. I'm calling it that it's going to be Zach Wilson this year, and Daniel Jones is better than Tua. Thank you very much. Navarro is talking about a long-ass Politico piece a few weeks back, says Judy Ruliani. Yeah, I'm not sure about that Politico piece, but I'm now forgetting exactly what this comprehensive study was that showed that basically it was very clear that it didn't originate in the lab, but I digress. I'm always digressing. Baruch the Scribe says the caller made a good point. Here in Chicago, a lot of the gun violence is gang-related. Addressing economic issues in the worst places could go a long way, right? And then, when you see that there's no economic element involved, it allows Republicans to take it in a more punitive direction and a racist direction when you're not addressing the economic underpinnings.
I mean, Philando Castillo was a member of the NRA.
He was.
Not that they came to his defense at all.
The NRA said dick about it after he was shot, and he was a licensed gun over.
I'm not misremembering that, right? Was he actually a member of the NRA, or just? I'm not
sure. But
maybe I want to double check that, but that's what my memory was.
Yeah. I'm not sure, but I know that the NRA didn't defend him despite him announcing that he had a gun and being a licensed gun owner, and that was like the hypocrisy that people were calling out.
Right. Yeah.
So the Hunchback of Gowanus Canal, which is amazing, says great call about gun ownership on the left, and would encourage viewers to look into the Socialist Rifle Association. Austin Houston said, I'm not a gun person, but if you live in a city like Houston where things break down through floods and freezing for a week at a time, I don't think owning a gun is all that unreasonable. That said, people are crazy here, and I lived in an armed camp. Aaron is not cool says, okay, I've done a full 180. I'm on board with the gun owner talk. I thought, Matt specifically and the caller who was from Michigan, I'm sorry I'm blanking on your name right now, made a lot of good points. Scrolling. I'm going to just play this for fun. Mickey7 says UCLA knocks off Michigan State, BYU, Alabama, and Michigan. Unbelievable. Student athletes need to be compensated. Go Bruins. And the final IM of the day. I think the politics surrounding sports are always fair game and interesting. It's when the genuine talk about specific players and draft starts that I blank out and have flashbacks to horrible family get-togethers, says Illuminati Kids. I'm sorry, but it sounds like I would get along with your family. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Kyle. Everybody, have a wonderful day, and see you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my power